Hi, is that working? For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kate Preston and I'm the Training Manager for Technical Services at Royal Free London. So my role is involved in all aspects of technical services, both non-sterile, sterile and aseptics. The presentation that I've got today is really to give a little bit of a snapshot of some of the challenges that we faced in technical services and how I've become in jobs outside of my trust to try and work with some of those challenges. So I think there's people in the room today who can probably identify with this slide. It's felt like technical services have been in some really stormy conditions over the last few years. I don't think we're out of that bad weather yet. I think there's still a few rainy days ahead, but hopefully we're moving into the right direction. But why has it felt so challenging and so turbulent? I can't get away from the Carter report. That was 2016 now. I'm not going to go into detail about that. It's been well talked about. But one of the areas that did cause some concern was the fact that technical services got put in the infrastructure elements of pharmacy. And initially, the message seemed to be very much that that wasn't needed to be a pharmacy job. We didn't need pharmacy professionals to be doing that part of technical services. And certainly when I was attending meetings initially, there were certain individuals who'd been very heavily involved with the Carter report who gave a very clear message that aseptic units should be shut down. They weren't needed. We could provide that work elsewhere. And that was really unsettling for everybody who was working in these environments. Following on from the Carter report, that led NHS Improvement to commission a review of all of the aseptic services that were happening in England. That was MHRA licensed, unlicensed, non-commercial, non-NHS commercial suppliers, looking at basically what was going on in those areas around the UK. They were looking at a variety of different products, so as I've listed there, chemotherapy, parenteral nutrition, clinical trials and investigational medicinal products, and also any radiopharmaceuticals that were conducted through pharmacy-led services. Sometimes it's outsourced to nuclear medicine, but they were looking particularly at the radiopharmacies that were within the units. So I think there's a lot of people who didn't really think that there was any surprises that came out of the Aseptic Review 1. A lot of the unit managers who were expected to feed into the data gathering tools knew a lot of the things that they were putting in there, but it did give an opportunity to collate a lot of information from the UK in one place, which could then inform some of the decision making. I think it's safe to say that it raised a lot more questions than it answered at times, but one thing that it did highlight was the huge variation of things that were happening in technical services across the country. That might have been because of different sized units, different types of work that was happening, but the variation was huge. One of the areas that was particularly interesting to me was the training around technical services staff. So the report highlighted that for assistants and technicians, there was a variety of training periods, if you like, and that ranged from less than 2 weeks right through to 7 weeks. And it made me question, why was that the case? If we were all doing the same job, how could we have such variety in the training that was happening? And was my training programme that I developed back at base actually sufficient? The Aseptic Review 1 also highlighted issues with the facilities that were there and the equipment that was used. Aseptics is a hugely expensive environment to maintain, and I think perhaps there'd been, from the wider sort of NHS trusts, maybe a lack of understanding of just how much money needed to be invested initially, and certainly on an ongoing basis to be able to maintain those facilities. There's a lot of expert equipment there, and that's not cheap to run. The report stated specifically that there's 37 facilities that can't actually provide the desired services that they would like to provide, and a lot of that was about lack of space, the layout of the facilities, poor reliability, and generally the lack of investment means we can't maintain the standards that are expected in the sort of changing regulatory environment. One thing it did also highlight, though, was the fact that we really do need to have the services that we provide. The problem that we have, though, is staff turnover. There's about a 15 to 20% staff turnover rate within technical services, and that is a little bit higher than the national average. And the Aseptic Review 1 specifically spoke of the Carter report. It's anecdotal, but they did say that the Carter report has had an impact on the pharmacists being recruited to technical services. I can only assume that that's the same for technicians. If anybody wants to move into a new sector of pharmacy, if there's so much turbulence and uncertainty, it's not going to seem attractive. All of that said, though, like I say, it did highlight the crucial work that we do. There's an increase annually on the work that aseptic services are doing, around about 5%. But that work is likely to increase further as advanced therapy medicinal products, the ATMPs, the gene therapy, etc., are brought from the research labs into the NHS units, and that's already happening around many units in the UK now. So the message is changing, and that's good. That's getting on to the brighter days. I think it's vital that we maintain that staff and that equipment that we have so that we can utilise those skills for the medicines that our patients need, which sometimes can only be made in NHS units. So a lot of information about Aseptic Review 1. That's now led to NHS Improvement, moving on to Aseptic Review 2, which is currently underway. NHSI have commissioned Deloitte to do this work, and there's many different aims. The slides are available on the SPS website, so I've just copied one of them there. But one of the aims that sort of speaks to me most is that they want to deliver a safe and resilient aseptic service that can meet the growth in demand for these services over the next 10 years and beyond. So I think that's really good to have such a solid aim for this review, because that hopefully will give us some direction and some certainty for a good few years into the future. As part of the Aseptic Review 2, the English Pharmacy Aseptic Services Transformation Board has been sort of formed, if you like. And the intention behind that is that they will inform the NHS strategic direction of aseptic services going forward. At the moment, there's still a couple of places on that board to be confirmed. So there's a non-pharmacy lead who is vacant. That's the person who's meant to chair that board. And they're also looking for somebody external to NHS Pharmacy to act as a representative. But out of the people who have been confirmed, the members include Keith Ridge, who is the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for England, Andrew Davies, who's the Director of Hospital Pharmacy and Medicines Optimisation for NHS Improvement. There's also representation from the Department of Health and Social Care, the MHRA, and also NHS Chief Pharmacist. So it's going to be quite a broad range of representation on that board to form that new strategy. What else has played into some of the uncertainty? Well, we've heard a lot this afternoon already about the changes to the initial education and training standards for pharmacy technicians, the change to the pharmacy technician qualification, and with all of that happening, especially the initial talk about removing aseptics from that qualification, caused huge concerns within the sector. There was also the talk of the introduction of the science manufacturing technician qualification, which again caused some uncertainty. Initial messages, it felt as if the pharmacy technicians weren't going to be needed and they would be completely replaced by these SMTs. Personally, I was quite concerned about that, because if my role almost was being taken out of pharmacy and was going to be done by other people who were non-pharmacy people, could I maintain my registration? How could I do validation if the area I was working in wasn't pharmacy? Some of that uncertainty was down to a lack of knowledge or perhaps a lack of understanding at the time. And I think when there's so much stuff happening, and it really has been a lot of change all happening at once, I think sometimes that change can be viewed with negativity and uncertainty, not necessarily appropriately, but at the end of the day, that's human nature. Sometimes it's hard to avoid. So that brings me to kind of why I'm here today, really, and how I became involved in some work outside of my trust. I was attending various different meetings in the London region in an education and training capacity, and there was lots of questions that I sometimes had about how the work that was happening was going to impact on technical services. Sometimes those questions couldn't be answered, and that's how HEE came to invite me to set up a small task and finish group within the London, Kent, Surrey and Sussex region to look at some of these problems and see if I could get some of the answers. So the remit of that task and finish group was to establish core staff workforce to deliver a safe and robust service, to define the skills required by the workforce, to explore the educational routes and pathways that were available or in need of development, and also to identify the current and future service requirements. Now, at the same point that I was starting to have sort of talks around getting that off the ground, the London and South East Aseptic Services Managers Group was also trying to get the same sort of workforce subgroup from their meetings and basically be looking at the same work. So with the agreement of the HEE Task and Finish Group, we decided that we were going to sort of formally move over into the liaison subgroup, and we would then take that work forward on a more permanent basis. So where we're at now is we've done some benchmarking work to understand basically what different tasks, different bands of staff in technical services do. So assistant sound pharmacy technicians from a band 2 to a 7, what does it mean to be in each of those roles and what skills do you need to do each of those roles? We also spent a lot of time sort of picking each other's brains, because sometimes there's a lot of people who know tiny bits of information, but it's not always together, around what courses are available and what training opportunities we already use for the staff in our area. One of the challenges that was highlighted through that is that places like Leeds and Manchester universities have some fantastic courses for aseptics, but they're actually quite expensive. One of the courses is nearly £1,000. It means that staff need to be out of the department for 4 days, and some of our trusts, we just can't afford to utilise that, so that has been problematic. The consensus of the group was that we would really like some more local one-day study days that we could send people on. It would be really good if we could send people to a central point and focus on that theory training that's so critical to underpinning the knowledge of aseptics without it needing to be repeated by every single department. It also highlighted that while we've got foundation courses for Band 2s, 3s, Junior Band 4s, we don't actually have much at the moment that we can send our experienced Band 4s looking to promote to Band 5, or the Band 5s that are already in their area who perhaps need a refresher on some of the changes that have happened in the years that they've been imposed. The liaison group, which I've mentioned, they've already been running an update to aseptics course for the last 3 years now, and that's been really useful. That was initially brought in when LPET disbanded and the foundation, the intermediate and the advanced course was no longer available. So that's been running about 3 times a year, getting loads of people in, and what the liaison subgroup is hoping to do now is create a senior study day which can expand on the knowledge that people have already got, update the knowledge that they need, and hopefully give a bit more of a platform to gain experience for people to move up from the Band 4 to the Band 5 level. Some of the other work that's been happening, other regions have been doing very similar work, so it's by no means just the London and Kent, Surrey and Sussex teams that have been working on this, but obviously I'm speaking from that perspective because that's what I've been involved with. One other thing that I think is useful just to highlight at this point is the TSET online learning modules that are available. For those of you who aren't familiar with them, there's actually a really good article in the Pharmacy Technician Journal that APT have sent out on the most recent edition. But that was taken down in 2015 to update because there was huge changes happening with regulation within technical services. And that online learning module is now being put back. There's a few modules that are still to go live, but that's a massive resource that can be used in workplaces to supplement the initial training that's already happening. So finally, just to say, I think one of the main things that is going to be important for keeping technical services together and keeping us moving forward is to have collaboration. That might be collaboration between trusts or between regions, but I think where there's been standardisation of work happening in other sectors of pharmacy, we perhaps haven't been as good with keeping up with that. So it might be that we need to be sharing ideas more, understanding what's happening in each individual place so that we can form a more cohesive approach going forward. I think it's also important that we need to embrace change rather than fear it. I'm a biggest worrier when it comes to change. My first idea is panic, and then when I understand everything that's happening, it's like, right, okay, let's crack on with this now, this is going to be good. And I think we just need to get rid of that fear initially. Challenge it, yes. Ask questions to understand it, absolutely, but embrace it and then move that forward. Like it says, national approach, I think we've been missing that, and hopefully we can try and have a much more national voice for technical services and move some of the ideas forward. I think there has been a lack of a voice for the last few years. That voice is getting a little bit stronger now, but I think APT UK has a role that could potentially be explored to increase that voice. So one of the things that myself and Ellen have just literal random conversations, nothing solid, but it's could we actually have a technical services branch within APT UK? There's a few faces that I recognise around the room who are involved in technical services, but I think there's a lot of people that we don't capture. Certainly speaking for my own department, there's a lot of members of the pharmacy technician profession who aren't members, and I think this could be a really good way that we could explore the potential avenue that we could, get more people on board. So if anybody's got any comments at the end of today, Ellen and myself would be really welcome to hear your thoughts on having a technical services branch. Also, if you're not directly working in those areas, but you can take that message back to your bases and maybe get in touch with the technicians out there that we're not necessarily reaching, that would be really positive and we really welcome that. So finally, this is just to show you the reports that I've been using. Both the slides for the Aseptic Review 1 and Aseptic Review 2 are on the SPS website in its entirety. If you're not familiar with SPS, that's the Specialist Pharmacy Service website. They're also quite active on Twitter now, and they've got some really good resources for all sectors of pharmacy, but particularly, like I said, the Aseptic Review. And also, just as a reminder, the TSET website is there as well if you want to go on and have a look at the online learning and the other information that they've got. So that's all for me. Thank you very much.